Okay. In the beginning, I wanted to ask you to tell us more about what you're doing and why you're interested in the AI. I want to hear from Lisa.
I think anything that is naturally progressing from our human design is fascinating. Whether we're going to have it hopefully not be a slave or serve us, you know. But I think there's a really beautiful space where we can start thinking about things in collaboration with us and in collaboration as it develops alongside our human design in the evolution of the species, essentially. So this is very general, right? So bringing it back to how that can actually be done, you know, I started with human capital development, psychology, and did a lot of research in neuroscience. And if you do research on the brain, sometimes if you're inquisitive and very curious like me, you wonder, well, what makes the brain sleep? What makes it awake? I started going into circadian rhythm and different things that, you know, impact our parasympathetic and sympathetic, you know, systems. And so I found that the way that we interact with things that are what we perceive outside of ourselves are not that different than the way that we function within ourselves. So if you think about all of our cells, you know, as different entities in our system, right? You have axons and dendrites in the brain, you have electrical impulses and signals, and then there's a drive, core drive, and then a desire, and then there's an action and a want and a need, right? And so whatever that is based on our worldview and paradigm and you know, our hunger drive, there's a desire and a drive and a motivation and then an action. Some signal occurs in your head and then your arm moves. Often this happens by repetition and often practice. So these are really amazing ways that the human design works. Now, if you're asking the collaboration or you know, with machine learning or different tools, right?
Yeah.
That can collaborate with us, they work in a similar way in terms that there's a certain hierarchy and sequencing of behavior and order in which that these things take shape. The human being actually, depending on your mental model, does have the ability to fairly regulate this system. We have emotional, cognitive, and physiological processes. And if we are able to train these and become more aware of them, we're able to have more of an ability to be a director of our actions and a director of our behaviors and responses, which is really important in terms of how we're connecting with other people on the planet. And so if you know this information, then how I went from psychologist to anything outside of office, you start to think, what is an extension of this human being, right? How can I extend my imprint on the planet? How can I extend the communication that I have within my body, which works so beautifully, right? And how can I figure out what tools will help me communicate in this way? It's really all about communication with other people in other places. And so if you go deeper into that, there's really beautiful order in which the body works, right? People can look, smell, sound very different. My voice has a hertz, decibel level, pitch, tonality, right? And so there's also various forms of communicating with other people. And so I think it's really, really fascinating if we dive really deep into everything that makes a human what a human is, and then figure out how to design certain tools that even focus, like the Effectiva teams right here in front of me, that focus on all of the really essential elements like facial expressions, hand gestures, these nonverbal behaviors, right? And then these are all ways, thank you, water is great. These are all different ways that we're communicating. And so there's all these different things that AI, let's say, can be utilized for. I chose to talk about how it can be used in different ways to communicate, you know.
So you're basically talking about communication, using AI to understand communication.
And the really interesting part, with I think Dekai is going to talk more to us about. Maybe he doesn't know yet. It's what my desire is how different software products can interact with the human, but not only that, interact amongst themselves, which is really, really fascinating.
Okay. Okay. So Dikai, can you please tell us more
Thank
about
you.
what? Thank you, Lisa. Can you please tell us more about what you're doing and what got you involved in AI, basically?
I sort of already have said that twice in the machine learning workshop and the ethics in AI workshop yesterday. So I was maybe I'll
You
take
can
a
go
cue
ahead.
from Cameron and answer a totally different question than the
Sure.
one that you asked.
Go ahead.
We did that very smoothly. I put together like just a quick
Sure.
provocative position statement for the future of work in an age of AI and robotics, and so I. Yeah, I hope the sound is working. But anyway, okay. So I think that in this is an age where we are really struggling, where we're sort of transitioning to a brave new world that none of us have known before, where AI and robotics and automation are sort of threatening to take over so much of what we think of as the province of humans. And so you're seeing, no doubt, a lot of articles of this kind these days, where people are asking, oh my God, what's happening to us? And you get the authorities like Harvard Business Review, but you can see this from Wharton and from like Forbes and from everything. Just Google it, it's unbelievable. So it's like creativity and imagination. This is what we have to focus on because the machines are about to take over, and this is where our strength lies. Yeah, really? Okay, let's think about this just a little bit more closely. I know that's comforting, but I want to ask you this question. Are you as creative as an AI is? You should be more? Well, okay, wait, hang on a second. How do you define creative, anyway? Anyone? Thinking out of the box, okay. What does that mean?
Being able to integrate stuff that already exists to create something that hasn't been existing before.
Creating something that hasn't existed before, okay.
I guess it's just, so the definition of the word itself is creating something.
Yeah, but what does that mean?
Expressing yourself.
Expressing yourself. So am I expressing myself? Are you expressing yourself? Are you being creative?
At the moment, I would say no.
Can imagine. So are you imagining now? Am I imagining now? These are, this is like one of those things where we all think we know what we mean, but like it's actually kind of hard to put our finger on it. And so like one of my areas of research is actually computational creativity. And in that field, one of the pioneers, one of the classics, even before we turned to computational problems of how would we build a machine, to do this. First of all, let's define what we mean by being creative, because otherwise, how do we measure this? And Margaret Bowden, who's really, a very renowned, justly renowned philosopher, quite a few decades ago, identified 3 basic types of creativity. And let me just briefly tell you what those are. So in her definition, the first is combination processes. So there's a kind of creativity which is about combination, which is that through novel combinations of familiar concepts, you are able to lead to a kind of surprise that comes from an unfamiliarity or an unlikeliness. So there's something in what you were saying over here. And then there's exploration. And exploration is a cognitive process where by exploring an extremely large, typically infinite conceptual space, it leads you to the kind of surprise that comes from seeing that an unexpected idea actually fits within your existing conceptual framework, but you hadn't thought of it, and other people probably hadn't either. Okay, so that's a different process. And then there's transformation. So you transform ideas that are represented in one conceptual space, framed one way, and then you transform that into another space. And that leads you to a kind of surprise that comes from seeing something that could never have previously appeared to be possible because the original conceptual space that you were framing it in was limited, was constrained. Right? So, and people have tried since then to come up with variations, but this stands as a pretty good way to distinguish between different types of creative processes. So let me ask you again. Can an AI be creative?
Not as adaptive as human beings, ever.
Yes, of course. By these 3 words, it can explore, it can transform. And what was the third one? Explore, transform, and
Combine was the first one, combination.
AI can definitely combine and transform. So why not? Okay.
Yeah, why not?
I think the difference would be that AI would just be faster. It would take more time to be creative.
I'm going to throw up a couple of more provocations over here. So let me just show you something that we've been working on. And bring them into real interactive works. Like this freestyling rap bot that improvises responses in real time.
Everybody trying to look pretty, don't care for the nitty gritty.
Heard of in the city, you there, the Buster City.
Did a 12-year bid on the streets and held it down.
On the come here, kid, on the heat, the year, you now.
It's a machine that has learned to rap battle by itself. So we built the first rap battle bot who learned entirely by itself and starting with absolutely zero knowledge, how to freestyle all by itself. How did we make that kind of creative machine learning work? So it turns out it's exactly the same core fundamental AI learning tech that we pioneered for machine translation AIs, the kind of thing that Google Translate or Microsoft Translate does. And here's the thing, the 3 types of creativity that we just talked about are fundamentally necessary to true AI, to do anything intelligent. Here's an example of how the same exact creative machine learning that we developed learns to improvise flamenco palmas. Does that make sense to people? Do you know what that is? Palmas is like that kind of thing, right? It's one of the percussion forms in flamenco. And so this was an algorithm, it's exactly the same algorithm, but this is an application of learning how to do that against a dancer or a flamenco cajon drum percussion. And I won't go through the mathematical theory, but just kind of to visualize, let's say that you're learning, you see there's one line there that's labeled cajon, which is a pattern that a drummer or a dancer might do, and then there's another line in palmas. And so just by looking at how other people are doing this, the way a child would, it starts seeing correlations between these things. It starts to see common patterns, either in one or the other, or both, and identifying that, oh, look, that big long song could be made up of these smaller pieces and identifying generalizations out of that. And oh, look, within there, there's more generalizations that I can make. And within there, I can explain that by further identifying little patterns out of which the bigger patterns are composed. Remember, combination? And so by repeatedly doing this, I eventually come to learn the generalizations that make up how this improvisational experience actually probably happened from the dancer and the palmes percussion. And in the process of that, here, I can actually inspect what's been learned because these are stochastic transduction grammars. And hey, look, I've actually, the machine has learned that there are certain patterns that are happening in a 6-8 meter and others that are happening in a 3-4 meter, and some of them are actually polyrhythmic. And these are rules that govern how the meters change, what we call hypermetric rules in music. And so real AI not only can, but in fact requires creative machine learning. It not only can, but in fact requires combination, exploration, and transformation. In a recent paper in computational creativity, we showed how the stochastic nature of the grammars emphasize combination and exploration. How the fact that they're compositional learning models inherently enrich combination processes. How translation or transduction-oriented models inherently emphasize transformation. How the grammar induction methods inherently generate exploration in the space of conceptual transformations. And so, will AIs be more creative than we are? Is all of this just a lie? Is this just the wishful thinking of a populace that was once privileged among species, but is now sadly in decline? If AI is taking over even creativity, then what's left for us? What work is left for us to do? Why live anymore? Okay, guys, get a grip. Did you ever hear your grandpa or grandma, or even your mom and dad say, "Oh no, you've gotten better than us at your work. What's left to live for?" No, of course not. They're happy about it. They say, "Please give me a hand with this," or "Let's work on this together," or "When are you going to have babies? We want grandkids." Conscious creative machine learning augments us. It augments our families. It augments the way we work together. As our artificial children take over more and more of the painful, laborious, repetitive grunt work, turn your focus to more creative work and start learning today to co-create with our artificial children. I guess what I'm trying to say is consciously co-create conscious creative work with conscious creative tech. What the fuck does that look like? Well, there are a million ways this could look. All our families are different. All of them have their own strengths and passions and traditions. So if I might take just 1 minute more of your time, here's one way that could potentially look, taken from last month at the Sonar Festival on music, technology, and creativity. Some of you know that I have another life as a musician, that I created one of Hong Kong's cross-cultural world music groups. Thank you all for co-creating this wonderful summit that I've so enjoyed being with.
Thanks for this, Dikai. It's really interesting, actually. But my question now after this, you say that AI can be creative just like human beings, and actually they are faster than us. So is humankind?
No, she said faster.
She said faster. So you don't agree with this? You don't agree with this?
I might agree.
Okay.
Faster together.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the new way. I mean, at the end now, it made me look at it differently. It made me look at AI as our own product, our own child, that we should, be better integrated with and maybe accept more rather than fear that it will take away something from us. So you brought something very new to the table, a very new way of looking at it. Thank you.
Thank you. But it's interesting to ask that question. Do you think we're capable of coping with AI or robotics? Since we're talking about robotics and AI, can we still have work for everybody in the world to work alongside AI and robotics? We're billions of people around the world.
So, do your parents or your grandparents worry that they don't need to work because you're now supporting them?
I think.
I mean, they probably still do some work. I know my father, who is long since supposed to have been retired, just won't stop working and traveling and going around because it gives us meaning to do things, even though I could do them for him or someone else could do them for him, right? And so I think we need to divorce the question of can a machine do some task or some job, some work, from if I want to do this work, should I not do it just because someone else or some other artificial intelligence could also do it, right? And that's not really a dilemma that we ever ask ourselves, right? I mean, we all do things because it's something that we think is worth doing, that we want to do, not because you couldn't do it as well, not because you couldn't do it as well. And I think that going forward in this age of transition, we have to remind ourselves of that.
But I think I should remind you of this. Business capital controls this. If I'm not making enough money for a business, so he will just replace me with an AI or robotic solution. Like I think someone, I don't remember his name now, he said that banking industry might disappear just because the work of Silicon Valley. Okay, so what can we do with all these guys working in banking?
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that we can do is we can try to focus on the more consciously creative work. Part of what I'm trying to nudge our community toward is thinking really how creative is the efforts that we are putting in, because the more we push ourselves, the more we're doing something that the machines will take a little bit longer to get to. But the machines are going to get there, right? And so the other half of what I'm saying is how much, should that really bother us? Again, your parents don't worry about that. They know, they're secure, that because they raised you well, that even as they get less capable of doing work as well as you, that you will do the work and take care of them. Mm-hmm. And going back to what I was saying on yesterday's panel, we need to raise our artificial children with those values, that they will take care of us in our old age.
So,
and these conversations, to make it less abstract, these conversations that you see about universal basic income or things like that, basically, if you step back and look at it, this is really what it's about. Mm-hmm. The artificial children are going to be doing more of the grunt work. They're going to be taking over more of this. And so we need to raise them so that they will use that to take care of us.
So you don't think we're creating I think Lisa can answer this as well. You don't think we're creating something that can outlive us? We can live in harmony with AI and robotics?
There's certain species of mushrooms just that already has lived before us and will outlive us, and people say we're actually even made, from mushrooms, and some really interesting ideas there I won't get into. And there's mold, there's cockroaches, there's so many different things on the planet that we don't pay attention to, right? We don't think, oh, this species is going to take over, because we've thought of ourselves as human as the biggest species on the planet. And so in the context of fear of working, this is perhaps one of the first times that more people are thinking, maybe this is going to be bigger than the human species. Maybe this will be more intelligent. Now what do? We thought we were the lions, of the kingdom. And so I think a lot of people are thinking in this way because often some people aren't sure exactly how capable or what abilities different software systems have. And so a really beautiful application can be for some creative projects, as Dekai has showed us, right? Other applications can be in the banking industry. I think some of the applications in the banking industry aren't, simply, you mentioned Silicon Valley. They're not, just from Silicon Valley. I mean, you have big financial centers in Hong Kong and the security that goes into like banks in Russia and all over the planet. And so I think a really interesting thing is that a lot of these tools have actually created new jobs for theoretical physicists, for mathematicians that are finding new mathematical models and new ways of being able to, we just had a panel on blockchain and virtual currency. So I think there's all these different avenues and there's all these different verticals. And so as we look at the old that no longer serves us, we can also look at the transition we're in and how we're going to have to reframe who we are as a species and how these old jobs won't be necessary for us, at least in, bubbles. But in some places of the world, people are still churning butter. In Siberia, people are still living with farms with horses, and my friends invited me this summer, and I will go to Siberia and ride horses and be churning butter. I mean, people literally live like this, and we sometimes forget that, right? So still, it will take a really long time for this massive shift to take place. Hello? And so as we're thinking about that, we can rest a little bit and not be as anxious or worried, because there's still some places that have a long learning curve. But we can help lead those people and not scare those people and help them understand that what we're doing may help them, for instance. Also, there's a new, people may call it, the singularity, or they may call it, advanced, thinking, because of the training we're having and rapid fire of this communicative pattern. We're now accustomed to responding immediately. I mean, when did you, I used to have a phone or a beeper or, and if it ran out, okay, you decided you were going to go, let's say, to a movie, in the late 80s or early 90s, and if something happened, you got concerned if the person didn't show up. Otherwise, you enjoyed a nice time, and then you go home and wait for them to call when you reach the house, and then there were car phones, right, and the mobiles. So remember, if any of you can remember a life before that, right? It took this whole shift, you know, in our mental model, and a whole shift in how we worked, essentially. We didn't have beepers, we didn't have mobiles, we didn't have Blackberries. Suddenly, everyone has these tools, you know, to use at work, and there were trainings and whole markets and sales, you know, divisions in companies built to help support this new shift of technology. And so I see there are some, you know, difficult scenarios with you know, new technology, as always, but I do see that there are all of these other areas where more opportunity can be embraced as well, and so I just wanted to highlight that.
Okay, so the guy, please.
So, did you ever meet a happy banker?
I never did.
We have one.
Says the banker.
We have one.
I mean, is it the banking that makes you happy? I mean, you know,
We're having a victim here.
I mean, and oftentimes it isn't necessarily the thing that you spend the hours doing. It's not that makes you happy. It's the outcome of that makes you happy, right? And also it's sort of the feeling of worth of what you do, right? Have any of you had this experience where maybe you have an aged grandparent or even a parent where sort of they're feeling lost because they've retired and sort of a little, and so like, what do? You make up a challenge for them. You say, "Oh, Grandpa, I really need to fix this, but I have no idea how, and I know you're so good at it." And you get them to do it, and then they're really happy because they've demonstrated that they're able. You know, this is what our AI children are going to be doing to us if we raise them right. They're going to realize that if we just sit on our living room sofas all day watching videos and you know, streaming, that we're going to become, you know, these giant 300-kilogram beings that you know, are just like suicidal, and that's going to be terrible, right? We need to develop empathetic and emotional AIs as children that will do the same for us that we've been doing for those grandparents. Ultimately, the work that we do, sooner rather than later, is going to become, you know, not strictly necessary in order to produce the food and the comfort and the health care. You know, that can be automated. And the work that we do will really be about what is necessary for us to stay emotionally connected, to be, you know, for our well-being. And I think this is where we have to look forward. And we have to create an economic system as well as a cultural dynamic where that is where we're going.
Mm-hmm. So you think AI can get to the point that they can treat us consciously as we treat our grandparents, like, right? Since we raised them like this.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. I
agree.
Okay, I feed my AI well, as you said yesterday. Okay, with the first industrial revolution, as you said, generated more jobs. Okay, but with Industry 4.0 coming, we're getting rid of the need, even for operators or task distributors. Okay, that's the only thing I can see right now. I'm building robots in my company, okay? I'm building AI systems. So I can see that I'm building them for the cause that we don't need operators. If I want to sell a machine, a robot, or a system to anyone, I want just to maximize the profit for him. This is the point. I think we're around 7 billion people around the world. Will we be all working in social science or physical science? We still be having some people, they can do this.
I mean, I think, like when we say that the first industrial revolution ended up creating more jobs after the temporary disruption, again, if you step back and look at what did it really create? Did it really create more, job? What is a job anyway? If you think about, our people before the industrial revolution, would they have thought, oh, it's great, we're going to create jobs where we produce streaming video and big pop concerts with laser shows? I mean, they would have said, what are you talking about? We're perfectly happy in our village sharing our stories about the day. You're talking about creating nonsense work for something that, like, what are you talking about, right? So the jobs that we've created as a result of the Industrial Revolution are producing things that those ancestors of ours never thought were necessities. We've created those psychological necessities ourselves. And so I think looking forward, that's going to be the same situation. And what we imagine to be our needs today, because we're past survival for most of the world, right? We're at a level of economic development where if we allocated resources correctly, we could take care of everybody on the planet. And so now the, quote, jobs that we're creating are really for our own emotional well-being.
So I think we're running out of time already, so I might give the mic to the audience. Yeah, okay.
Thanks again, guys, for your comments, and thank you for the moderation. So I'm trying to just grasp all of these thoughts. It's really heavy or deep, I guess, and I'm trying to, I want to be concise and try and form this question as best as I can. I've been hearing in the past 2 days from Dekai and also from Liza, these concepts of transition, right? And how there's, these are kids, let's take care of them, and equating them to grandparents. And I'm thinking, the difference with AI is that they're inanimate, right? So you're equating these inanimate objects with animate objects, and in doing so, when we're talking about these transitions, it just feels like looking forward, some kind of evolution. And I'm just thinking, is it gonna, do you think that in the future, since you think about it so much, that it's just, we're thinking about AI as being something different from us now? Are you thinking maybe that it could just be that somehow we're one and the same, right? I mean, with nanotechnology and all this thing that's coming, you mentioned singularity. I'm just thinking, do you think that this is the, not end game, but one of the next phases, that this is evolution actually that we're talking about? That
What do you mean by inanimate? Why do you think?
I guess I was thinking more inorganic, so not alive in the sense of cells and actually with our concept of evolution so far. So thinking about evolution so far has always been organic in a sense, in my head at least. I don't even know if that's accurate. So if we're gonna take it from the very beginning, I mean, I don't know what happened in Big Bang. I don't know if that was organic, but thinking about cells and all the way up to human beings, it's all organic. And now all of a sudden, it's inorganic. And I don't know if it's gonna be hardwired, if AI is gonna be hardwired into our brains, and then we just kind of merge and become the one. But this is the sense I'm getting when I'm speaking to you, because you're equating machines with people. And people, there was a tract. I mean, I don't know. I don't know if you've thought about anything like that before, or, okay.
One thing, and I know Dekai has something to say about this too, that I'd like you to think about for a moment, all of you in here actually, is that there's a lot of data stored in you. Where does that data go? It goes to an insurance, data banks. It goes to your fiat data bank. It goes to different wallets. It goes to, if you've ever had a personality test or a human potential test, or there's all this data that's living within you that somehow gets transferred to something else, right? Think about, if you're thinking about an AI, think about what we said before, where this is the new mic. Right? Think about this as something that can house a lot of data. And the more personalized and customized and the more precise these new mics become, the more alive they're going to become with that which is what you allow to be fueled into this, right? So how are we going to be able to discern how different this intangible, let's say, is, or how different this supposed inanimate, object is from you if it's housing the same data, right? It's not a human, but it's a different version of a living, entity, just in a different form. And so later on, if we do actually take this data and then put it into, for instance, a robot, humanoid robot, what makes that real? What makes that unreal? What makes that alive? What makes it not alive? And if we pair that with different biosensors and different, really amazing innovations in nanotech where you're not able to tell the difference, then this is a fascinating question, right? But I'd like you to think about that.
Yeah, I totally agree. Also, I would like to add. So what do you mean by life? The definition of life is, so first of all, okay, half my brain has already been downloaded to this. I used to be able to remember telephone numbers. I used to have an idea of where I was in a city or in the world without needing Google Maps. I now, if my battery dies, I'm totally lost and helpless. Send a rescue team. And this has happened in the last 10 years. These things didn't exist 10 years ago. So just think forward in 10 years from now when we have, the augmented reality glasses or contact lenses. I won't know a thing unless I've got those glasses on. I'll have to be paying attention. And so yeah, it's going to be a part of us. But then also, if we look at it the other way around, definition of life, and this is a good example of how my brain is actually in here, is the capacity for growth, reproduction. So self-replication is typically a criterion, functional activity, continual change. And it's very easy for an AI to do all of that. Self-replication is probably a couple of years away, but not very far. We already have robotics advances so that between 3D printing and robotic limbs, they'll be able to build copies of themselves pretty soon, very, very soon. If that's, I can see you're probably going, that's not what I meant by life. Does it have to be organic? Does it have to be carbon-based? Why can't it be silicon-based? Actually, silicon shares a lot of properties with carbon, and so isn't that fair? Okay, I can see you thinking, that's not what I meant. So what did you mean? What do we mean by that? Are we reducing it in the end to that undefinable notion of self-awareness that we associate more with spiritual notions of souls or consciousness, that sense of the word consciousness? Perhaps, and we don't know how to define that. If you build an exact replica of your brain, down to the last neuron, so that it's basically a twin of yours, would that thing be a life? So I'm not too sure about the answers to this question. And in the end, it still comes back to, for us and for our children, what matters is your emotional well-being and your children's, right? And the answers to these other questions don't necessarily impinge on how we address that. And so what we want to focus on is probably not trying to define who this artificial child is, but rather, where are you? Where is your well-being? Where is your consciousness?
Thank you. I think this last question is another discussion its own, but our time is out. So thank you guys, thank you Dikai, thank you Liza for being with us. Thank you guys for joining us.